It's December 2022 and I have travelled out to Denmark to see Dynaudio because I wanted to find out more about them as a manufacturer and find out what makes a speaker a Dynaudio speaker, and in particular to find out more about their new Focus range of speakers, because I have the Focus 50 at home to review at the moment. And I've been out here for about 4 days. I've done a number of different things out here, but I've learned so much, really enjoyed my time, and I've got as much of it on camera for you as possible. So on that note, I hope you enjoy the video. So I'm here with Otto Jorgensen, who is the product training manager for Dynaudio. And I just want to say, Otto, thank you very much for inviting me out to Denmark, for hosting me over the last couple of days. I've really enjoyed myself. It's been fascinating, really informative, and just generally a very good time. So thank you very much.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. But the reason why I'm here is to find out more about your new Focus speakers that I have the 50s at home to review at the moment. But on my way out here, on the flight out here, I realised I actually don't know that much about Dynaudio as a company and as a brand, and maybe some of the products and history. But I want to talk to you mostly about the Focus speakers because, you know, that's the reason why I'm here. So my first question to you would be, I suppose it relates to all Dynaudio speakers really. What makes the Focus, or I suppose what makes a speaker a Dynaudio speaker?
Yeah, I think generally with our company, our DNA is our loudspeaker drivers. Since the last 45 years, we have been manufacturing our own drivers, perfecting them over the years, and our loudspeaker drivers today is basically a perfected variant of what we started out with more than 40 years ago. I think one of the key things about a Dynaudio speaker is craftsmanship. So that goes both for cabinets, how things looks on the outside, but we are very proud of our craftsmanship that goes on the inside. And to give you an idea of the level of detail that we're going into, maybe we should look at how a loudspeaker driver is actually made and how that creates sound. That might create an opportunity to explain why all of these differences, are so important to us. First of all, as most people know, 200 years ago, a Danish guy discovered that if you put a current into a coil of wire, it will create a magnetic field. So if you alternate the polarity of that current, we can change the magnetic field around the coil of wire. So essentially, put that coil inside a magnet, and we can make the coil move. So the main issue with that is it's not very efficient because the polarity of the voice coil, if you can imagine that, is that way, and the polarity of the magnet is this way. So it's actually moving in the wrong direction. So what we do is, first we're adding a pole piece. I'll try not to make too much noise here. So what the pole piece is doing is taking the polarity of this magnetic field and steering it to the inside of the voice coil. Then we have a top plate we put on top of the magnet, and now we have a small magnetic gap, so we are steering that magnet field directly onto the voice coil. So once you put the voice coil inside of the magnet, I have an assembled one here, so now you're controlling it with a lot more force directly onto the voice coil, so it makes it a lot more efficient. So now that we made the voice coil move, attach a diaphragm to the end of the voice coil, and that moves the air and creates sound. The main issue here is if you only attach that to one point in the basket, it can kind of wobble around, so you want to avoid that. So then we add the spider, which is essentially keeping everything in place. Now we have 2 points. I have one here that's already assembled. Now we have 2 points of contact, so it's moving like a piston, so it can't wobble around anymore. So all of these materials inside a basket to hold everything in place, that's essentially a woofer. And most loudspeaker drivers work this way. So the difference between a standard loudspeaker driver and Dynaudio is more or less how meticulous we are in every single piece of component in here. And it has a lot to do with balance. As soon as we changed one of these components, all of the rest of it, the whole balance is thrown off, so we have to adjust all of it to make the driver work.
One of the things that stood out to me in terms of speaking to you and some of the R&D guys is how much time goes into each individual part of that driver, how many hundreds of hours of thought process go into what essentially seems like quite a simple thing, but it's not, is it?
Yeah, no, at the outset it's simple, but because all of these things has to be in an even balance, it's very complicated in the end to make sure everything is right. One of the ways I like to visualize that is if you imagine an old-fashioned scale where you're trying to balance everything out. When everything is perfectly balanced, it doesn't take a lot of difference. If you take out a small piece of weight on one side, it's off balance. And once it's off balance, you can do all sorts of things. You can add things, remove things. As long as it's still off balance, it doesn't really change much. But if you do it just right, you put it back into balance. And that balance is extremely important to how the loudspeaker sounds. And it's easy to envision in a scale, but that is one dimension. Imagine doing that in 20 different dimensions. That's basically what you're trying to do when you're developing a loudspeaker driver. And a lot of things that doesn't seem very obvious that it would make a big change can actually affect the sound quite significantly. One example I'd like to show you is the voice coil former. So on a lot of our marketing, you will see us claim that we're using fiberglass voice coil formers. And we haven't really been explaining much, so why do we do that? And that's basically the tube that the voice coil sits on. So in the old days, what we would do is we use a voice coil former made out of aluminum. And it's a good material for lots of reasons, but the main issue with aluminum is that it's conductive. So when a conductive material moves inside a magnetic field, it causes what's called eddy currents. So what that means is that it creates its own magnetic field that is resisting the larger magnet. So when I put this into the magnetic field, it doesn't really want to go in. There you can see the magnetic resistance makes it go slowly. So if we change that former to fiberglass is not conductive. So when I put this in the magnetic gap, it just falls straight in. That doesn't have that resistance. So what seems like a small change in material creates a very big change in how the whole loudspeaker driver works and how you are designing the rest of the driver around this.
When you showed me that, I think it was yesterday you showed me that, I was amazed by that actually, the difference. Yeah. And just in my mind I'm thinking obviously the fiberglass must make that driver much more efficient in terms of its pistonic motion. Is that true? Is that?
Yes, it means that it's much easier to design the other components. So the thing is, this creates sort of a damping effect for the driver, and you actually do want some damping inside a driver. But the damping of a driver is determined by its weight. It's determined by the surround of the diaphragm and how stiff is the spider and all of this. So without having the damping in the voice coil former, you're more free to design whatever you want to do in the other physical parts. So you can create a better driver by removing that issue from the driver.
One question I do have for you is, again, back to the driver look. They look very similar to me, and I know that Dynaudio use MSP as the main material for the driver cones. But I've always wondered whether the tweeters also use the same material, or maybe a different version of the same material, because whenever you listen to a Dynaudio speaker, there is a really nice cohesiveness between, mid bass and the tweeter. So is it the same material or is it different?
No, it's completely different. I understand where the question is coming from, but it's two completely different materials. But again, they have been perfected over 40 years to work together. So we don't develop tweeters and woofers. We develop loudspeakers. So we want them to work together as good as possible. So the MSP is this material that we use for a woofer. But we have a very particular look to our woofers. And that's basically because this material is created in one piece. So what looks like a dust cap is not actually a cap. It's part of the whole vacuum formed piece. That's all done in one process. So these indents that might look like holes are actually the backside of these dimples that we use for gluing the voice coil on. So we have a larger surface when we are gluing on the voice coil. The touching surface between the voice coil former and the diaphragm is larger, so we have larger power handling. Now for a tweeter, we are using coated soft domes. So this is actually one of the domes from one of our tweeters. This is basically a piece of felt that has a coating on top of it. And the reason we are not using MSP, again, is the properties are completely different. The requirements in the high frequencies are different in terms of weight versus stiffness, for instance. So it is a completely different component. One of the interesting things is that this whole piece that I have in my hand here, again, like the MSP, looks very similar. This is actually the same part in virtually all of our loudspeakers. So some of them are hand selected for the more expensive speakers, but essentially the part is the same regardless of product. So again, what determines the actual performance and the level we're at is whatever goes on the backside of this part. But essentially it starts out as this piece of silk, which has a lot of holes in it, because the silk itself is essentially there to hold the coating. So the coating is the diaphragm. And the reason this is really light is so thin that it's actually see-through. So that's what you need for the high frequencies, is just that lower weight. We could never do that with an MSP. But for the woofers, we need to add some weight anyway. So, the other way around, this would never work for a woofer either. But they are designed from the outset to blend well together. So all of our drivers has a very even sound across a very broad frequency range with a very low degree of ringing or resonances. That's really a core thing about our drivers. We want to avoid ringing and resonances because then it's much easier to make them blend into each other. So they sound more similar.
Makes perfect sense. And one of the interesting things you told me about was the manufacturing process of the tweeters and how extremely tight tolerances there are in terms of that process that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so everything, our drivers is really a combination of some high-tech, automation in our manufacturing, combined with a lot of manual processes on how to do these things. But when we are producing these, once we have produced a bunch of these, every single one of these are tested before we go to the next step to make sure they're within these tolerances. And once they're put into a tweeter, the complete tweeter is again tested before it's allowed into a loudspeaker. And at the end, the whole loudspeaker is tested before it goes out to the customer.
One thing we definitely need to talk about is Jupiter, because that's one of the main motivators for me coming out to Denmark. Sure. I wanted to see it in the flesh. I wanted to see, I've seen pictures, I just wanted to see it. It's a really very, very cool thing. For people that maybe don't know what Jupiter is, can you tell us what it is and what does it give you as an advantage as a speaker manufacturer?
Yeah. Jupiter is a 13 by 13 by 13 meter room, which is not an anechoic chamber, but what we call a simulated anechoic chamber. What we do is you raise the speaker up into the middle of the room, you do a sweep, and we know how long it takes for the sound to go from the speaker to the wall and back to the microphone. So essentially we cut off the measurement just before it hits the microphone again. That means that we're only measuring the sound of the speaker. So that's simulating an anechoic chamber. But what's different from Jupiter compared to anechoic chambers is that we have an arc of 31 microphones, meaning that with one sweep, we measure a full 180-degree arc. Then we turn around the speaker a little bit and do another measurement. And you can imagine that a series of those will give you a full sphere measurement of the loudspeaker. And we can do that in 20 minutes. So the difference really is speed. So we're doing a very similar thing to an anechoic chamber, but instead of taking 2-3 days, which is what we would take in the past to do an anechoic measurement, we can do that now in 20 minutes. And that means that we are moving it from being a validation step. That's what we did in the past. We would validate products and, estimate the performance, the measured performance based on this one measurement, and then a few times in the project, or sometimes even only at the end of the project, you do another validation to check that everything is roughly where you want it to be. What we have now is we're using it as a tool in our tuning. So we can make a small change, do a full measurement. So while we're listening, which is a very important part of this puzzle. So while we're listening, we do the measurement, and then you correlate the listening and the measurement, do another small change, and start over. So instead of doing a measurement once every few months, we do it maybe 20 times a day in the development of the speaker. That means that we can fine-tune the sound to a much finer degree than what we could before, and the results really show that.
Because that was one of the things I was most interested in. I think you are one of the only companies in Europe to have a facility like that, maybe even further afield. I'm not aware of any others. If it gives you that level of measurement capability, does it solve the problem of listening?
Yeah.
I don't know if that question's right, but hopefully you know.
The question is right, but the answer is definitely not. It's a tool that helps us, but our goal is not to make perfect measurements. Our goal is to make the best sound. Measurements is a tool that helps you get there, but just because a loudspeaker measures really nicely and all the measures are fine, it can still sound bad. And one of the issues is that you can have things that doesn't look like much in the measurement, doesn't look like anything you need to take care of, and then you listen to it and it's, hey, it actually throws off. I was talking about balance earlier. You can throw off that balance by tiny things that doesn't look like much in a measurement. And at the same time, you can have errors that look really severe in the measurement, but aren't really that audible. As an example, we don't make the lowest distortion levels of any loudspeaker in the world, but we make distortion types that are more easy on the ear. It's not as audible, but it might give a higher percentage on the measurement compared to a different speaker. But a smaller percentage might still be more audible depending on what type of distortion is it, where is it in the frequency.
Coming back to the focus speakers just for a second, because it's an active streaming speaker, there's a hell of a lot going in there. But the active side means that you can use built-in amplification, active crossovers, DSP. Does that mean the focus speakers are an easier speaker to manufacture and make work?
No, I would say in terms of acoustics of designing the loudspeaker, it's different. I wouldn't say one is easier than the other. It's a completely different process, and so we're not starting out with a passive speaker and then making it active. So we didn't just put an amplifier inside an existing speaker. That's not how we think about it, because the whole process is completely different. But there are things you can do in the active world that you can't do in the passive world. But we put a lot of pride in when we make the active speakers that we don't use the DSP and all of the active technologies to make up for deficiencies in the driver quality or the cabinet quality. So we are making drivers and cabinets that work acoustically from the outset, and then the DSP in the amplifier has to do as little as possible. So we actually have very simple crossovers in our active speakers compared to a lot of competitors, simply because of the quality that's inherent in the driver and the cabinet in the first place. That makes it easier to make an active Dynaudio speaker compared to a lot of other products. But in our world, it's definitely not easier. If you look at the complete package, there's a lot of things that you have to do that doesn't have anything to do with the actual sound. One of the main challenges actually is the certifications for all of the protocols that we have in here. So we have a loudspeaker that's compatible with AirPlay 2, Chromecast, Spotify Connect, Tidal Connect. It's room ready, UPnP. All of these services have different requirements. Making all that fit together is extremely complicated, and that's by far actually the toughest challenge. And like I was saying, earlier, that it might seem arrogant, but making the sound is for us the relatively easy part of making an active speaker. It's getting the whole thing to work, making it easy to use for the customer. That's the challenge.
In a way, with an active speaker, you hide the amplification in the speaker. So if you're hiding it, does that mean you're trying to hide something from the customer?
Yeah, so and definitely not. We're never afraid of, like, that goes into the craftsmanship we're talking about. We're never afraid of showing what's inside the product. And in this case, we're very proud to do so, because this is actually the amplifier of a Focus 30 and Focus 50. And if you look into other active speakers, including our own from the past, this is probably 3 times the size of what you will see in most products. If you consider a Focus 10, it's basically the same without this board. This is an extra power amp board. So this is what goes into a very compact Focus 10. So we put a lot of effort into the amplifier side. So what you have is probably the most advanced amplifier on the world in this product. We have Pascal power amplifiers sitting inside these Faraday cages, which shields them from the rest of the electronics that are quite sensitive. Those power amplifiers are extremely powerful. They're designed for pro use. They're designed for 10 hours loud playback, and they cannot fail in the professional market. But they also happen to sound really good, which is why we use them. So that combination means that you can really run all day with this without any issue. And we chose the modules such that we always have more power than we need. So no matter what you're doing with your loudspeaker, you will never run into clipping with the amplifier. You'll never run into thermal problems. It will never shut down because it gets too hot.
And you touched on something really interesting there, because as I've been around, there's a lot of professional studio speakers that remind me, there's similarities between them. Some of them are small, some of them are a bit more obvious. So similarities between the professional speakers and the focus speakers, even down to, I noticed a switch on the back of one of them that puts it into a bright mode and a dark mode and a neutral mode, exactly the same as what you get with the Focus app.
Yes.
So having a professional studio DNA, having made lots of speakers for many years for professionals and for studios, does that make it easier to manufacture hi-fi products? And are they different? Are studio speakers from Dynaudio different to hi-fi speakers from Dynaudio?
Yes, it makes it easier, especially when making active home products, that we have a lot of experience with active speakers already. We've made active studio monitors since the early 90s. And curiosity is, the first time we made an active loudspeaker was 1986, where we made a hi-fi speaker with a built-in amplifier, which failed miserably because the market just wasn't ready for it at the time. So since then we've been working on it in the pro world, and in 2012 we made the CO speakers, which was the first real wireless high-end product at the time. 2014 was the Focus XD, which was really the predecessor to the current Focus. So that experience, of course, helps us a lot. And again, especially on the acoustic sides, we know how to do these things. So that makes it a lot easier. And we're taking a lot of knowledge from one side to the other. For instance, that tilt balance you're mentioning, that was designed specifically for our studio monitors. And then, we saw how well that works, so we brought it into the Focus speakers as well. It goes for the amplifier technology as well. That these amplifiers are essentially the same technology that's in the core studio monitors. And we have a lot of things that are probably too long to explain for this video, but we have a lot of ways we have designed the digital signal path, for instance. We don't consider digital just being digital. We need to preserve the digital signal path properly inside the amplifier when you're going through different stages in the amp. To keep that as pure as possible is something we developed for the core system that we then put into the focus speakers.
So it is fair to say that Dynaudio studio speakers you should be able to get a very similar sound from a Dynaudio hi-fi speaker to a Dynaudio studio speaker.
Yeah, from a sound perspective, we don't really consider them differently. We consider form factor to be different. So we are taking some things into account. How big a room do you expect them to be in? How far do you expect to sit from the speaker? That mostly changes the form factor. If you sit close to a speaker, there's a limit to how much you can space out the drivers, for instance. If you consider a confidence speaker, we have a large vertical array of speakers. That would not work if you're sitting half a meter from the speaker. So there are some things you need to do depending on the situation that we do differently. But it's the same people tuning them, and it's the same mindset when we're listening to it. So our whole idea about music is that when a musician created something in a studio, or the studio technicians created a sound in the studio, we want to bring that sound to you at home. So it's really the same thing we want you to hear, but what the loudspeaker needs to do for you to hear the same thing might be different.
One of the things that really stood out to me about the new Focus 10, 30 and 50 is their inclusion of Dirac Live, because anybody watching the channel knows that I'm quite heavily invested in that. I do a lot of work with Dirac Live, and obviously I've been using it for many years. So my big question was why? Why choose to include Dirac Live?
We saw it as an opportunity to go to a next step to integrating sound into the living room. That's really what we are trying to do. We have a vision which is called to enrich life through authentic sound. We really think it makes a difference to people to have an authentic experience of music at home. Until now, we have basically been making the best possible loudspeakers we can, made sure that they sound great when you set them up properly in your room, and then what you actually do to them and how you make them work is really up to the user or the dealer. If you have a good dealer, they will help you on these things. But we really stopped there. So with the focus, we wanted to be more, directly have a more direct relationship with the end users. Now we're really creating a complete system, and part of that is we're also taking away your ability to kind of fiddle around with that system to optimize it for your specific room. And Dirac really is the market leader in that regard. And one of the things we really like about Dirac is that it's not just a set and forget thing. You don't just set up a microphone, press a button, and then think everything is correct. Because just like with our Jupiter measurements, the measurement won't guarantee that it sounds good. So the Dirac functions as a tool that you can go in and adjust the target curves, adjust the frequency range you are correcting, do a lot of manual things to really optimize it. And that's one of the main reasons we chose that particular piece of software, because it allows a qualified installer to really come into people's home and really optimize what you're getting.
What's really interesting about that, Otto, is we didn't plan that answer before coming on camera, but exactly what you've just said is what I say all the time about it, and how I feel about it and why I like it is that it puts me in control rather than someone trying to make a decision for me 10 years ago in another country or something. It puts the user in control. But obviously you want to try and keep it tight with dealers so that people know how to use it properly, really, isn't it? That's important too.
What we did with the Focus is we left it as an option. So this is something you can do. So if you don't want to do these things, fine. You don't have to, and you don't need to pay for it. But the product supports Dirac. So if you want to use Dirac, you purchase a Dirac Live license. If you want to do it yourself, you can. If you want to have a professional installer do it, that will probably give you the best result. So these are options we provide for you. So we don't really want to decide what people should be doing, but they are there as options.
Which I think is the best way. Give people the tools and they can use them if they want. Otto, this has been a fantastic couple of days spent out here in Denmark with you guys. I've seen so much, I've learned so much. I just want to say a huge thank you to you, a huge thank you to the Dynaudio team, everybody that's kind of hosted me, looked after me, showed me around. I just got to say thank you to you.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
And on that, obviously a huge thank you to you for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the Pursuit of Perfect System YouTube channel if you'd like to see more hi-fi videos like this and my upcoming review of the Focus 50 speakers. Also, thank you again.